See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Yalda Hakim and welcome from Kabul, Afghanistan, and welcome to this BBC News special on Afghanistan 100 days since the Taliban swept to power. Taliban forces captured Kabul on the 15th of August, emboldened by the withdrawal of foreign troops. In the 100 days since then, how much has changed? Afghanistan's democratically elected government was replaced by an unelected caretaker cabinet made up exclusively of men who are senior Taliban figures. Several of them are on a UN sanctions list aimed at those who pose a threat to international peace. Despite Taliban assurances about access to education, only male students were told to return to secondary schools in September. The Taliban have said they're working on a way of allowing girls to go back to high schools. A month into the Taliban's rule, the UN warned that the country was at risk of universal poverty. The UN's migration chief says 80% of Afghans they have surveyed from almost 4,000 communities said they had lost all of their livelihoods. The UN's World Food Programme warned in October that 22.8 million people in Afghanistan could face acute hunger this winter, with 8.7 million already in urgent need of food aid. They say that drought, displacement, the collapse of public services and an economic crisis are pushing the country on the brink. I've been travelling across this country and speaking with ordinary Afghans about the dire situation they're currently facing. This is my report. With me now is Abdul Kahar Balki, the spokesperson for Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Balki, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Afghanistan is facing a humanitarian crisis. The UN says it's a march towards catastrophe. How does the Taliban plan to manage this situation, given how dire it is for so many Afghans? Mr. Balki, thank you very much for your time. That was Abdul Kahar Balki, the spokesperson for Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let's go now to Dr. Margaret Harris, spokesperson for the World Health Organization. She's currently in Kabul and joins me live. Dr. Harris, thank you very much for your time. You're listening there to the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Afghanistan. He said that give this government a chance, that they shouldn't be punished for the actions of the past. But from where you're standing and what you're seeing the Afghan people go through, just give us an assessment of how you see the situation 100 days since the Taliban swept to power. Dr. Margaret Harris, spokesperson for the WHO, thank you very much for your time and sharing your thoughts here on the programme. I'm joined now by Asad Majid Khan, Pakistan's ambassador to the United States. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. We've been hearing this half hour from the World Health Organization. We've seen images of children suffering from malnutrition. How can Pakistan, Afghanistan's neighbour, help in this dire situation?
Sorry.
Indeed. Ambassador, I've only got 20 seconds left on the programme, but I'd like to thank you for joining us here on the programme. That was Ambassador Asad Majid Khan joining us there from the United States. I'll be back in the next few minutes to continue our special on Afghanistan 100 days since the fall of Kabul.
Hello, welcome. You're watching BBC News. I'm Kasia Madera. In a moment, we will be returning to our special programme on Afghanistan to mark 100 days since the Taliban returned to power. But first, let's take a look at some of the day's other news stories. 46 people have died in Bulgaria after a tourist bus crashed and burst into flames on a motorway in the middle of the night. The passengers were all from North Macedonia, returning from a weekend in Turkey. 12 of the victims are children. Only 7 passengers escaped. China has warned all Taiwanese companies trading on the mainland that they will be punished if they support the island's independence movement. It follows one of the biggest conglomerates in Taiwan, the Far Eastern Group, being fined in a case that Beijing has linked to the firm's political stance. In the UK, hundreds of politicians have joined the family of the murdered MP, Sir David Amess, for a mass in his memory at Westminster Cathedral. Sir David was stabbed to death at a constituency surgery in his Southend West constituency last month. On Monday, hundreds of people turned out as a memorial service was held in Southend.
Hello, I'm Yalda Hakim and welcome back to Kabul, Afghanistan, and welcome to this BBC News special on Afghanistan 100 days since the Taliban swept to power. Taliban forces captured Kabul, Afghanistan on the 15th of August, emboldened by the withdrawal of foreign troops. In the 100 days since then, how much has changed? Afghanistan's democratically elected government was replaced by an unelected caretaker cabinet made up exclusively of men who are senior Taliban figures. Several of them are on a UN sanctions list aimed at those who pose a threat to international peace. Despite Taliban assurances about access to education, only male students were told to return to secondary schools in September. The Taliban have said they're working on a way of allowing girls to go back to high schools. Well, I sat down with Taliban's international spokesperson, Suhail Shaheen, and I asked him about women being able to go back to work and when all girls across this country will be able to return to school. That was Suhail Shaheen, the Taliban's international spokesperson. Well, joining me now is Mr. Dawood Sultanzoy, who used to be the mayor of Kabul city under the former government. Thank you, Mr. Sultanzoy, for joining us here on the programme. Just tell me a little bit about how much your life has changed in the last 3.5 months. Mr. Sultanzoy, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. That was Dawood Sultanzoy, the former mayor of Kabul. Let's go live now to Washington and speak with John Bolton, who is the President Trump's national security advisor. Mr. Bolton, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. We've been hearing from a wide range of voices talking about the economic crisis in this country, the humanitarian crisis in this country, and of course, the security concerns that this country faces. When you look now, 3.5 months on, what is your assessment of how things are unfolding? Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much for joining us here on the program from Washington.
Thank you for having me.
Now, earlier in the program, we heard from the Taliban spokesperson, Suhail Shaheen, who said he hopes that girls will be able to return to school after the winter break. Now, that's roughly around March 2021. In the meantime, teenage girls across this country, millions of them who have been denied the chance to go to school, say they're reeling. They're desperate to get back to school, as are their teachers. We've been speaking to a university teacher who wants to keep her identity anonymous for her own safety and asking her how life has changed since the Taliban came to power. That was a teacher here in Kabul who kept her identity anonymous for her own safety. Let's speak now to General David Petraeus, former commander of international and US forces in Afghanistan. General, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Earlier we heard from Ambassador Bolton, who said that intelligence agencies are now predicting that Afghanistan could again become a breeding ground for international terrorism. Just give us your thoughts on that and what you're hearing. And starvation. General Petraeus, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. That was our BBC News special on Afghanistan, 100 days since the Taliban swept to power. I'm Yalda Hakim here in Kabul, Afghanistan. We'll have much more coverage throughout the day. Stay with us. Hello from Kabul, Afghanistan. I'm Yalda Hakim and welcome to Impact. This is 100 days since the Taliban swept to power. How are things going for the people of Afghanistan?
And I'm Kasia Madera in London, also coming up here on Impact. A horrific bus crash in Bulgaria kills 46 people, 12 of the dead are children. And China warns all Taiwanese companies trading on the mainland that they will be punished if they support the island's independence movement. All of that coming up right here on Impact.
Hello and welcome to Impact. I'm Yalda Hakim from Kabul, Afghanistan, where we're doing special coverage throughout the day on 100 days since the Taliban swept to power and the internationally backed government fell, and we saw the Taliban arrive to the gates of the capital. Okay, Jeffrey Schlosser, thank you so much for joining us there from Utah.
Thank you very much.
That was some of our coverage of the situation here in Afghanistan. We've been covering it for the last few weeks. We've been looking at the economic crisis, the humanitarian crisis, and of course, the ongoing discussions about security. Kasia, I'll have much more coverage throughout the day, but back to you in London.
Yalda, as always, many thanks, Yalda, with extensive coverage with that special programme as well from Kabul. Thank you so much, Yalda. We'll be back throughout the rest of the day as well here on BBC World News for special coverage on the 100 days of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. So stay with us here on BBC World News. Stay with us here on Impact, because coming up there is shock, there is dismay in Bulgaria after a terrible bus crash kills 46 people, many of them children. Hello, welcome back to Impact on BBC World News. I'm Kasia Madera. Let's turn to the rising tensions between Beijing and Taiwan. China has warned all Taiwanese companies trading on the mainland that they will be punished if they support the island's independence movement. Now, this follows one of the biggest conglomerates in Taiwan, the Far Eastern Group, being fined in a case that Beijing has linked to the firm's political stance. So let's have a closer look at this warning from China. We're going to speak to Emily Feng, who is the Beijing correspondent for the American news organisation NPR. So, Emily, the Far Eastern Group appears to have been targeted with what are, quite frankly, normal regulatory fines over what are considered routine violations. So how do we know that they may be politically related? How does China prove that companies are supporting an independent Taiwan? It is like a film, isn't it? It's like the stuff of Hollywood nightmares. Lots more, of course, on our website. And Yalda is going to be here in just around half an hour's time with much more from Afghanistan as the country marks 100 days since the Taliban took control. I'll be back too. I'm on social media. If you'd like to get in touch at BBC Kasia Madera. It would be good to hear from you. Bye-bye for now.
Hello and welcome to Impact. I'm Yalda Hakim from Kabul, Afghanistan, where the Taliban swept to power 100 days ago.
And I'm Kasia Madera in London, also coming up here on Impact. A horrific bus crash in Bulgaria kills 46 people, 12 of the dead are children. And China warns all Taiwanese companies trading on the mainland that they will be punished if they support the island's independence movement. All of that coming up right here on Impact.
Hello and welcome back to Impact. I'm Yalda Hakim and welcome from Kabul, Afghanistan, the Afghan capital, where 100 days ago we saw the Taliban sweep to power and the Afghan government that was backed by the international community collapse. Now, Taliban forces captured Kabul on the 15th of August, emboldened by the withdrawal of foreign troops.
Approach.
Indeed, fascinating listening to your thoughts there, Mr. Joseph Borrell. Thank you very much for joining us on the program here from Dushanbe in Tajikistan. As you heard there from Joseph Borrell, the situation in this region across the international community on how to deal with the Taliban remains varied. It's a mixed view depending on what the relationship was with the previous government, with the Taliban regime, now with the Taliban regime of the 90s. And of course, as Mr. Borrell was saying there, and the guests we've heard from today on our program, that the humanitarian crisis is the number one priority for the international community to find a way to deal with this very immediate crisis. Back to you in London, Kasia.
Yalda, thank you to you, to the team there, and to all of your guests as well. A lot of different voices, a lot of perspectives from Afghanistan on this day, 100 days marking the Taliban taking control of Afghanistan. Our thanks to Yalda Hakim and the team there. We will have much more special coverage from Yalda throughout the day here on BBC World News. Stay with me here on Impact, though, because still to come, we'll be looking at the shock and also the dismay in Bulgaria. This is after the terrible bus crash which killed 46 people, many of them children. Hello, welcome back. You're watching Impact. I'm Kasia Madera. This is BBC World News. We're going to turn to the rising tensions between Beijing and Taiwan. China has warned all Taiwanese companies trading on the mainland that they will be punished if they support the island's independence movement. It follows one of the biggest conglomerates in Taiwan, the Far Eastern Group, being fined in a case that Beijing has linked to the firm's political stance. Emily Feng there, the NPR correspondent in Beijing. Now, the man convicted of murdering the British student Meredith Kercher in Perugia in Italy in 2007 has been released from prison. Rudy Guede from Ivory Coast was due to end his sentence in early January, but it's been brought forward under a procedural Italian legal step. The murder escalated into an international courtroom drama. Ms. Kercher's American roommate Amanda Knox and Knox's Italian boyfriend were also convicted, only for the decision to be overturned almost 4 years later, reconvicted and then finally acquitted on appeal. 34-year-old Guede, however, was found definitively guilty of Ms. Kercher's sexual assault and murder after his blood-stained fingerprints were identified. The World Health Organization has issued a warning to Europe as cases of COVID continue to grow, with a number of countries imposing new restrictions and lockdowns. COVID deaths across the continent currently stand at around 1.5 million, but the WHO has predicted that intensive care units could experience high or extreme stress in 49 of the 53 countries between now and the beginning of March. It added that cumulative reported deaths are projected to grow by around 700,000 in the next 3 months, to reach over 2.2 million by spring 2022. 46 people have died when a tourist bus crashed and burst into flames on a Bulgarian motorway. The passengers were all from North Macedonia, returning from a weekend in Turkey. 12 of the victims are children. Nick Thorpe reports. Any developments on the investigation, of course, will keep you up to date. You can get in touch with me via social media at BBC Kasia Madera on Twitter. Thanks for watching.
Hello, let's take a look at the weather across Europe. And it's been very unsettled over recent weeks.